Hi. So while we're waiting just a couple of minutes in case there are anybody else going to pop in, I'm Alison. Welcome this evening. It's really lovely to see you all here. I am the owner of Campsie Coaching. I am a specialist practitioner with the Chrysalis Effect online recovery program, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Femke Williams. So you can give us a wave, Femke, who is also a recoverer and a specialist practitioner with the Chrysalis Effect, and a former nurse. The key thing for this evening's talk. So just while we're waiting, it would be really nice if you could maybe pop in the chat, as far as you feel comfortable, who you are, maybe where you come from. How you found us would be really helpful in reaching more people, and what you'd like to get out of today's webinar so that we can make it a bit more interactive and answer your questions. So looking ahead to what we're going to do, just a little bit of sort of housekeeping, I suppose. The first thing to say is that some of what we're going to talk about is very sensitive, quite difficult. So I'm asking if we can make this a really nice, safe, supportive space for each other, and to keep confidentiality so that anything that is said today stays within this group. And just to be aware, if you've got other people with you, just to make sure that you can't be overheard if somebody else is speaking. I am recording this, but I'm not going to record the questions and the interactive parts of it. So it's just the presentation so that I can send you a link to the video later on. Okay, so in terms of what we're going to be doing this evening, this is the Getting Your Life Back name really comes from what I hear again and again working with the Chrysalis Effect, is that desperation really when your life has sort of come off the rails and you are stuck with this chronic exhaustion, and a real sense of fear that is this all my life is ever going to be, and I want to get my life back. And I hope that what Femke and I will be able to show you is that recovery is possible. It's something that we have done, and we work with lots of other people who have also recovered. And that actually, when you do reach full recovery, it's not just about getting your life back, because often the life that you had is what made you ill, but it's about developing a better life, the life that will really sustain you, make you happy, and keep you healthy. So we're going to start off. I'm going to share a little bit of my recovery story, what happened to me, how I got ill and how I got well again, and then Femke will do the same as well. And then I'll talk a bit about the work that we do as wellbeing coaches alongside the Chrysalis Effect program, because essentially we are self-employed wellbeing coaches and recovery specialists, but we do work alongside this program. And I'll talk a little bit about why that coaching dimension of it is an important aspect of recovery and what it does in terms of supporting you back to full health again. And I think at this point, it's really important to say that there is such a strong message out there that if you have ME, CFS, fibromyalgia, any of these things, long COVID, that this is something that you have to adapt to, and that there is no medical cure and therefore no hope. And I would say that actually it is true that there is no medical cure, but the perspective that we take on this is that actually your body has an incredible capacity to heal built in. And so we take a biopsychosocial approach, which means identifying what are the stresses and strains on your body and your mind that are creating the symptoms. And it's about removing those in order to actually help aid that natural healing process. But more about that later on. And then we want to have a session at the end where you can ask us any questions and maybe get a little bit of discussion going around this topic. So to talk a little bit about myself, I was going to say I was a nurse. I am a nurse. I think there's a lot of people would say once a nurse, always a nurse, better or ill. But I started my nursing career in the army, and the picture that you can see on the top left here is me in my army uniform back in 1987. Didn't go well. I wasn't really suited to it, and I had an awful experience of being bullied. And I can see now that that was one of the early impacts on my health that was cumulative over the years. But what I did learn during that time was that I absolutely loved nursing and it felt right for me. So when I left, I was desperate to carry that on. So I applied to do an undergraduate nursing degree at the University of Edinburgh. So in that second picture, you can see me in my student nursing uniform. And I spent a summer in Kenya in a rural hospital as part of that training. And it was an incredible life-changing experience. But again, more traumas, both in terms of what I was seeing around me, but also what happened to me while I was there as well. And my student nursing years were really, I mean, nursing is never an easy profession, is it? But it was a difficult time. So it was the late 80s, early 90s. So it was the time when the NHS was breaking up into trusts, and we had the introduction of Project 2000 and the Community Care Act. So there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of change, and there was a really big disconnect between my training, what I was taught I should be doing as a nurse, and my experience on the wards. So by the time I finished my training, most of my class had actually started talking about leaving, even though most of us didn't. And that stress, as I said, had already begun to build up. But I did qualify, and I worked as a staff nurse in Edinburgh, both in the hospital and community settings. And things gradually built up and got more and more difficult, but I got more and more convinced that nursing was right for me and I needed to stick at it. Until the crash point came for me, one of my early crashes. I had my first child when I was working in the community in an area, Leith Docks, where there were very high levels of child abuse, prostitution, drug use, and I could not separate out my experience as a young mother from what I was seeing at work, and I burnt out completely. So my health visitor boss came in one afternoon and found me face down on my desk, just completely catatonic, and I was sent home, and that, in effect, was the end of my nursing career in practice. I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, sent home and spent several months recuperating, and at which point I decided I am a nurse and I need to stick at this. I need to find another way forward. So I was seeing an awful lot of newspaper sort of online headlines at the time about nurses and the shortage of nurses, because not much changes. But the loss of vocation and that nurses are quitters and that they are not committed anymore. And that's why we're having all these problems. And that just made no sense to me at all from my experience. So I did a PhD. I went back to university and I started to explore what is going on for nurses. Why do so many want to leave? Because that was the other headline. They all want to leave. And I really struggled to find anybody who'd actually left. There were only a handful of people I could interview, but most cases, it was people who said they wanted to leave, but felt stuck because they loved nursing. They said, I love nursing, I hate the job, and I know it's making me ill, but I can't leave. I can't let down my colleagues, I can't let down my patients. And what else would I be? I'm a nurse, you know? That's my identity. And that's stuff that very much feeds into the work that I do now and my interest in nursing and chronic exhaustion. And I completed the PhD, but I got to the end and I was told very clearly by my head of department that nursing research is not about nurses, it's about patients. And there isn't a place for you. There will not be funding for this kind of workforce research, which kind of triggered the second wave of illness. And for the next 11 years, I stayed at home and I looked after my children. I was a carer for my parents, and I really drove myself hard, and I had mounting symptoms all over my body, as so often happens to us. So I went from specialist to try and find out what was going on. And it was years before I got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I was really lucky in that I found the Chrysalis Effect fairly quickly after my diagnosis, and I started on the programme, and I'll talk a little bit about what that actually involves. And I was on it for a while, and I sort of got partially better, and then I had a major crash, which put me into bed for several months. I had cardiac problems. I was taken into hospital in an ambulance, and they couldn't work out what was wrong. And it became apparent to me that while I had been dealing with all sorts of other areas of my life, my nutrition, my exercise, learning to pace, what really was at the root of my illness was relationships and emotional stuff. It was about the reasons why I'd driven myself so hard over the years and was just doing crazy levels of activity. And trauma. So the relationships within my family, which made me feel that I had to drive myself like that, otherwise I had no worth. And that was the final piece in my jigsaw puzzle for recovery, was actually dealing with some of that really quite tough relationship and emotional stuff. But I got through it with the support of the Chrysalis Effect. And the pictures on the bottom, I should say that top right one is me with my PhD with my daughter. But at the bottom left there, you can see me, the photos I had taken when I first set up my coaching business. And the one on the right really, I think, demonstrates the length of that journey. So I've gone from a situation where I can't sit up in bed without having palpitations and gasping for breath, to starting a kayaking course. I think that was back in March. And last weekend I did my first capsize drill in my kayak. So hanging upside down underneath the canoe in the water. So a million miles away, and something I could never have imagined when I first started out with that. I want to get my life back. So I want to talk a little bit more about the nursing aspect of this, because I think that nursing both made me ill, but it also helped me to recover. And so in this slide, I've included some of the images that were around during COVID of the superhero nurse. And this is something that always made me feel comfortable. Kind of expectations of the nurse as somebody who is strong, who's always there for everybody else, always gets it right, and has no needs of their own. And on the left there, this picture, which really I found deeply uncomfortable, it's just the sense of that nurse who's holding the weight of the world on his shoulders. But at the same time, I think it's also really powerful imagery that we are socialized into, is that these are the sort of expectations. And it can feel really good to be the hero, the person who can actually be there and help. And so that was something I really had to get to grips with during my recovery. What did that actually mean? Where was my humanity? Where was my vulnerability? Which was quite a frightening thing to explore. So that was kind of the negative stuff, the driving, the perfectionism, the expectations within nursing that contributed to my becoming ill. But on the bottom right of this slide, I've included a cartoon that I had above my desk all the way through my training. And I always saw it as me, as the little student nurse at the bottom of the bed going, why? Because we were always taught evidence-based practice, always evidence-based practice. You have to question, even if it's the doctor. And that really, I think, set me up in very important ways for when I became the patient, which was really quite a mind-bending experience to go from being the carer to being the patient and dependent and all that goes with it. But I didn't necessarily believe what the doctors were telling me. I wanted evidence, and I wanted them to explore the reasons why I was ill and not just treat my symptoms. So when I was told that the only thing they could do for my hormonal imbalances was a hysterectomy, I asked, why couldn't I see a hormone specialist? And I kept asking questions all the way through my recovery. And there was a sense, I think, of anger there as well, which kind of gave me the energy I needed, even when I was utterly exhausted, to keep going, is that this is not going to be, that there must be answers out there, and I'm going to keep looking for them. So at that point, I think that's probably enough about me at the moment. Femke, are you okay to come in and talk your section and share with us a bit of your journey? If I move on to the next slide for you. And then
all right. Thank you very much, Alison, for that presentation so far, and thank you for having me as a guest speaker. I will only take a few minutes, but it's really lovely to just be able to come in and tie into what Alison was talking about earlier, and our stories around where we were and how we moved through things and where we are now. And so I am Femke Williams, and I was born in the Netherlands, and in 1999 I moved to Scotland, but I had already been qualified as a nurse in 1995 and worked in district nursing mainly, but I'd only also carried on to work in clinical trial research. Well, it was more like a health promotional study at university, because like Alison, I also spent time in Africa as a student nurse, and it was one of those things as well that really opened my eyes to certain things. It caused some kind of images of trauma as well, and seeing how things could be done differently and how we had to work with the resources that we have. And it really spurred me on to find ways to work more in research as well. And so when I moved to Scotland, I then ended up going back to nursing, though, because obviously once a nurse, always a nurse, but it's also when you're a nurse, you can work anywhere and they're always looking for nurses. And so I worked in various areas, in hospitals and care homes. But then through that, through links and through an agency as well, I ended up back at clinical trial research support. And then after I had my first child, I was made redundant there and went back to nursing. But that then, with all the responsibilities, very similar to what Alison was saying, you know, when you are then becoming a mother and you have all these other responsibilities as well, and the fact that I was actually, just after moving to Scotland, still kind of trying to settle into that whole environment, having left a whole life behind me and then settling into a new home. I forgot to mention that when I moved to Scotland, I moved in with my now husband, but he already had a family as well, and so I had an instant family. There was a lot of stuff going on. Let's leave it at that, because I'm now rambling on a bit. But it was just it's about the fact that there was a lot of stuff going on, and there was also a lot of stuff that I was suppressing and pushing away from stuff that had happened before I had moved to Scotland. So I ended up coming into this new life with just whole new responsibilities, whole new circle of friends, starting over, and there was a lot of stuff that I wasn't dealing with. And in 2001, I ended up with a burnout as well. Basically, I was going down that downward spiral of having these unexplained aches and pains and emotions, and basically I was pushing through. You know, I was just ignoring all these symptoms and just telling myself that I had a good life, I had everything going for me. Why would I not feel happy with things? You know, why was I feeling emotionally unstable a lot of the time? And why was I having all these aches and pains? And it was mainly in the shoulders and the lower back. And basically, until one point when my husband came in with my two children, and it was Mother's Day, and I have been working night shifts, and all I wanted to do was sleep. And of course, they were there with their presence and everything else, and all I could do was just cry. And I still to this day, you just feel bad about it. You know, it still feels horrible that I reacted to that and to my family like that, and that I have been snapping at them, and that I just couldn't cope with the whole work, the whole home situation, and everything else. And then for the fact as well that there was some unprocessed stuff that I hadn't dealt with. And I think that's when it dawned on me that there was something I needed to do to lift myself out of that situation. And I think with that, you know, that sensitivity that most of us will have, we are highly sensitive persons as well. We pick up on other people's emotions, and working in the environments that I had, I felt that I was often picking up on other people's stuff and carrying that along with me as well. And so tapping into that higher sensitivity and tapping into my own creative nature as well, I also awakened more to spirituality, really, and finding that there were different ways to deal with my emotions, and with, you know, working more with my body as well. I started to listen more to my body. Where was this all coming from? You know, and in 2012, therefore, I ended up starting with my own business in reflexology. Initially, I studied reflexology because I felt that I wanted to be more in the preventative side of things. So I still believe in nursing and the caring, and I wanted to be in healthcare, but it felt right to me to tap into the natural side and natural healing, and that's where I was introduced to working with energy. And so I ended up being able to calm my own nervous system, and that was one of the best things I ever did, because you come out of your head and all of that stuff that keeps going on in our head, and you feel more aware of what's going on in your body. And this holistic kind of approach to health and healing then also led me to train on as a chakra dance facilitator. Now, this sounds a bit woo-woo to people maybe, but because I have been introduced to working with the chakras and with how our energy system supports our health and well-being, this was a way for me to use movement, music, and art as a way to actually help us to come back to self, really, our authentic selves. Because that was one of the things that I felt I had lost. I'd lost that whole identity of who I really was, especially when I left nursing as well. You know, it was like, who am I really without all of this? And instead of believing there's something wrong with me, it's trying to find ways to lift yourself out. And anyway, for me, working with energy, that was the main thing to do. And then I discovered the Chrysalis Effect, and started to become a well-being coach, because this wonderful biopsychosocial approach was exactly what put everything I had already been studying in all these bits separately, and the background, my nursing background, it put everything together, you know, as being able to offer a package of health and care to somebody who was dealing with this downward spiral of, you know, these aches and pains and symptoms of emotional and physical health going downward. And basically, that meant that as a well-being coach, I can help people to look at all of these facets and all these aspects similar to ourselves, myself and Alison, we've been through in all of these areas in our lives, how they all holistically need to be addressed for us to move forward with. And yeah, now like I said, I integrate the healing arts. The healing arts to me is using art as therapy, as a way to reflect on our inside as well. So what's going on the inside, reflected on the outside, so that we can start to get more sense of it, and also for us to sometimes not having to use words, you know, to, if there is past trauma or whatever it is, that we don't have to always relive it. It's just about being present in the moment and seeing what's going on for us right now, and use these healing modalities to start to embody who we are. And so we use the art, we use movement, and we use music as well. You can use voice, you can use different ways to express yourself. And for me, that was a really big thing, because I find it very difficult to express myself in words if it's around emotions and the way that I feel. And so it's about bringing that joy back into our lives. And for me, that was a big turning point in a full recovery. So yeah, that was me really. That's where I am now, working as a wellbeing coach and workshop facilitator. So,
Thank you, Femke. That's lovely, and yeah, I very much resonate with that sense of there's so much gone on in life that's difficult and traumatizing, and the last thing you want is to have to keep talking and talking about it. So all these different ways of addressing those problems, and getting back to yourself. Who am I underneath all of these symptoms? Yeah, so talking a little bit now about how I work, how Femke works. As I said, we work alongside the Chrysalis Effect, which is an online recovery program that was set up 15 years ago by somebody called Elaine Wilkins, who had actually recovered from ME herself after 6 years of illness. And her response to that was to go out and to try and find other people who'd recovered. And to do that basic research to say, well, what did you do? What made the difference? And being a coach, having a coaching background, she brought all of that together into a program which looks at every single area of life. So there are other recovery programs out there. But I don't think there is another one that really does. And it always reminds me of those activities of daily living that are going back to in training, that takes you through every single aspect of your life, whether it's nutrition or movement, environment, your thyroid and adrenals, your relationships, and helps you to explore what is it that's happening in each of those areas that's contributing to you being ill. And really at the heart of this program is people who have recovered. So quite a lot of us practitioners have been through the program and then trained to support other people. And so the other thing I think is unique to the Chrysalis Effect is the sense of the importance of addressing isolation, because these illnesses are so isolating. We get stuck at home thinking we're the only one, and that there's nobody out there who cares or can help us. So it centers around a closed Facebook forum where we have peer support, so people can actually talk to each other and share their experiences, but also encourage each other. And one of the wonderful things as you go through the program is suddenly finding, actually, that person's asking a question, I know the answer to that because I've been there, and beginning to feel a sense of agency and being able to help again. So the program is ILM accredited, and it's also accredited with the Federation of Holistic Therapists. And in the last couple of years, we've been doing some pilots with the NHS, which has been really exciting. So one of those was with NHS staff in the north of England with long COVID, which was wonderful to watch, actually, and to see that although there are aspects of long COVID which are related to specifically physical damage and respiratory kind of issues, but there's an awful lot of overlap with other chronic exhaustive conditions. And we could see the people coming through the program really benefiting from it, and lots of their symptoms disappearing, and some of them actually reaching full recovery. In fact, one of them is an occupational therapist who had long COVID, who's now training as a specialist practitioner with us. But we also worked with GP providers in the West Midlands with some of their patients. And again, we saw some fantastic results where people were actually getting rid of all of their pain and recovering. So I think we're both of us really passionate that there is so little out there actually about recovery as a possibility. And that it's important, I think, to understand that it is possible. It's not easy. So we would never promise that we can help you, that you will recover, because it's something that you do for yourself. But it's something that you can do for yourself with guidance and support from people who've already been there. And I think there's a fundamental difference in the work that we do from the medical model, in that I was talking earlier on about the frustration of thinking, yeah, these are the symptoms, but what's causing them? What's really getting to the roots? And so often I was given medication, lots of different types of medication for different symptoms, which was just about knocking the symptom on the head and alleviating it, but not getting down to those deep roots. And as a gardener, I know that if you don't get those really deep pernicious roots out, then they will keep regrowing. And so through the Chrysalis Effect program, what I do now as a coach is help people to really explore what's going on and what are the things that are underneath the symptoms that are causing them, and what changes do they need to make in their lives in order to address those and make sure that weed does not grow back again. And it's different in that it doesn't break you down into a series of parts. So when you go through the medical route, you're sent to lots of different specialists, and everybody's looking at different parts of your body. So you might see a respiratory specialist and a cardiologist and a rheumatologist, and I saw a spinal surgeon and a neurologist. And none of them saw me as a whole person, and none of them really thought about how that part of my body affected that part of my body, because I'm a whole system, not a series of body parts. So we are very much about looking at you as a whole person, and that you are the expert on yourself. What's normal? What's happened to you? And that's one of the big questions, is what has happened to you that has brought you here, and what needs to change, and how can we support you to do that? So I wanted to look a little bit now at some of what has come out of 15 years of work with the Chrysalis Effect in terms of understanding what are those roots, what do we see, what are the patterns that we see in clients that give us clues as to what's wrong. And Elaine has developed over the years what she calls the ME profile. And I think ME is the label that was most commonly used at the time, but this applies across the board to chronic exhaustive conditions. And what we see is people who are overwhelmingly a type A personality, who are very driven, perfectionist, and overachievers. And that's a phrase, type A, that tends to be used about the kind of the business setting, the high flyers. And we do see quite a lot of people who have come from that kind of a background. But it also applies to people whose drive gets put into other areas of life. And that is very much something that we see amongst healthcare workers and nurses, is a sense of a real need to care and to make things better for other people and to get it right. And one of the things I remember is this fear that if I get it wrong, if I don't do this perfectly, somebody might die. And that is a really difficult thing to actually live with day in and day out, and especially when you're out in a workplace that's understaffed, that has the kind of pressures that we've all experienced. And the second thing, part of this MA profile, is that people tend to be very highly sensitive. And this is based on the work of somebody called Elaine Aron, and has actually been shown to have a genetic component, but also to be linked into experiences of trauma. So people who develop chronic exhaustive conditions tend to take in larger amounts of information from their environment and to process it more deeply, which means that it's much easier to get overwhelmed by your environment. And also, you know, it's quite common for people to be shy, simply because it's sort of a pushing back on the world that's overwhelming. There tends to be a very strong sensitivity to smells. So if you're like me, the person who walks through the department store holding their nose through the perfume department because it's overwhelming, or sensitive to sounds and feeling physical pain when people drop things, and chemicals, foods, lots and lots of sensitivities. And when you sort of think about a workplace, whether you're on a ward or in the community, the chemicals that you're exposed to, the hand washing all day, the noises and the beeps of the machines and the smells, it's a really intense environment. And people who tend to choose caring professions tend to be quite sensitive. And so it's a sort of a downward spiral for some people. And the other element of being a highly sensitive person is being very empathic. And by that, I mean somebody who doesn't only recognize other people's emotions, but feels them. And it can be very difficult, especially if you don't actually realize that's what's happening, to be able to distinguish what you're feeling from what other people are feeling. And that's something that was, I think, a big part of my work when I was in Leith, working in the community, of trying to separate out how I felt about my child from the emotions of the parents and the children I was working with in these sort of abusive situations. It all got very tangled up, and it was difficult to leave it at home at the end of the day. We see that people tend to have a very high expectation of themselves. So we see a lot of people who are overgivers, who find it very, very difficult to meet their own needs at all, and tend to always put it off and say, well, I will do this for me when I've done this for all the other people. And somehow they never really get onto even the bottom of the priority list. And that's part of this buildup of stress on the mind and the body, because they're not looking after themselves, not even meeting their basic needs. And I remember one of the things when I was working on the wards, I sort of took a pride in the fact that I could go for a whole shift without going to the toilet. Crazy. But one of my fundamental bodily needs I wasn't meeting because I was too busy looking after everybody else. And there's this tendency to say, I can only rest when it's all done. So the next element of the ME profile is that we see a lot of people who tend to live in their heads, and Femke referred to this earlier on, this sort of anxiety, sort of rumination, worrying about the future, a sense of needing to try and control things, anxiety, but also looking backwards into the past and worrying about what you said, or replaying conversations, or beating yourself up and thinking, why didn't I do? And if you think about it, if you're spending all this time bouncing between anxiety for the future and rumination on the past, you're not actually spending very much time in your own body. So it's quite difficult to get a sense that right now, I'm quite safe and it's okay. And so your body is in a constant state of fight or flight and anxiety, and you're not getting those messages of safety. And we also tend to get disconnected from our bodies. So my not going to the toilet was because I was not getting the physical messages from my bladder that it was full. And that links in, it's not really time to go into this here, but that links in very much to the pain of fibromyalgia, of a disconnection between the mind and the body, and actually knowing what sensations you're actually having and why. We see an awful lot of people feeling that they are a fish out of water, or people talk about being a square peg in a round hole, a sense of not really fitting, but also a sense of never quite being good enough. And that often goes right back to childhood and is very much tied into this sense of feeling driven. So I've never actually quite done enough, so I've got to do more and more and more. And talking about childhood, we see a lot of problems in early childhood. Often actually things that people don't recognise were problematic, but we refer to adverse childhood experiences. So people who've grown up in homes where they looked after parents, or where they had parents who had mental illnesses, which meant that they weren't able to meet your needs as a child. And this parentified child is something that has been very much tied in to people choosing to become carers, because you learn at a very early age that in order to keep yourself safe, you need to look after the adults in your life. And that becomes just a normal part of who you are and your identity. And it's quite difficult to see and to operate in any other way. And that was very much part of my experience. So my baby brother died when I was 18 months. And my mother was told that she shouldn't grieve him because he'd gone to heaven. And she wasn't there for me. And I learned that the most important thing in my life was making sure that my mum was happy. And I carried that on to everybody around me. I became the carer in my family. I went on to be a nurse, and the circles of people that I was feeling responsible for just got bigger and bigger. And then, of course, on top of that, what we see is an awful lot of trauma as an adult. And the things that you might think of abuse and violence and drugs and those sorts of things, but also what we call small t traumas. It's sort of the ongoing low-level things that mean you never really quite feel at ease and safe. So these are the kind of patterns that we see again and again and again over hundreds and hundreds of profiles that people send in to us when they join. And I wonder if this is actually resonating for anybody. It would be great if any of that sparks off in you, if you could pop that in the chat box. I also wanted to share with you, I think, quite quickly on this one, because we haven't got a great deal of time tonight, and I do want to have time for questions. But we operate with the Chrysalis Effect with a recovery pathway which describes where you are on your recovery journey. And Femke and I have done a video. I'll put a link at the end in the chat box to this. It's on my YouTube channel. But essentially, this is something that starts phase one. We talk about people being in denial. So this is sort of right back at my nursing career when I was having lots of early warning symptoms, but I still saw myself as being essentially healthy and strong, and I can power through. And that's what we hear a lot, is I can push through, I can do this. I'm not ill. I'm pretending everything's okay, until you reach the point where, I suppose we talk about the domino effect. It's like the final straw, or the first domino in that cascade gets flipped over, and you end up with a cascade through your whole body that affects every symptom. And your body essentially says no more and stops you from doing what you were doing. And so you rest for a while because you can't really do much else. And over time, you gradually begin to get some energy back. And what we see then is people move into phase 3, where they're desperately looking for the causes. So they're lots and lots of Googling for answers, trying to find out what's wrong with them, going from specialist to specialist to specialist, having tests which usually come back negative, and this awful spiral where you're hearing so often that there's nothing wrong. You begin to think, well, am I mad? Am I lazy? Is it just me? And then going off and trying essentially anything. So we see people who have huge long lists of the complementary therapies they've tried as well. So they'll find lots of things that help a bit, but nothing really that puts it all together and gets you back on your feet again. And what we see is when the big changes happen, when people really start to shift their symptoms, is when they move into phase 4. Doing what it takes, and the internal search is what we talk about. And this is when people will actually notice the patterns I've been talking about in themselves and think, why is it that I've not looked after myself? Why do I find it really physically uncomfortable to even think about putting myself first? And begin to work with support to change some of that stuff and to lift some of the pressure and the expectations that have led to you being overwhelmed physically and mentally. And then eventually moving into phase 5, which is about relearning and relapse, which is when you generally have a pretty good idea what you need to change, but it's actually really difficult to put into practice. So it's the sort of falling off the wagon and trying again. And recovery is never a straight trajectory. It's always ups and downs, varying degrees. But each time you have a dip or relapse, there's something else to learn from it. And gradually through phase 5, what we see is people have fewer and fewer of these dips as they're learning, and you really, really begin to embed how to look after yourself. It becomes a natural part of your daily life. And when you reach that point, that's what we call full recovery, when you've had a full 12 months with no symptoms at all. And that's where Femke and I are now. So that's not to say we never get ill or that bad things don't happen. But because we now know how to look after ourselves, we never reach that point of becoming overwhelmed. We know what to do to look after ourselves. This is what we call the 8 elements wheel. This is just to demonstrate what I was talking about, the Chrysalis Effect, looking at absolutely every area of your life. And the online program, you work through at your own pace, and it will deliver information and worksheets to work through. So it's about understanding what's going on and applying it to yourself, and then being able to actually start making the changes to recognize what they are. And this is also really useful because people often begin feeling really overwhelmed. It's like, there's a million things I could do, so where do I start? So we use this as a tool for focusing down and saying, okay, one step at a time, what are you going to do today? And we also use measuring our outcomes. We use the system impact questionnaires that are used in the NHS so that we can keep track of your symptoms and actually see in statistical form your progress over time. And that obviously was a really important part of the NHS pilots that we were doing. So if you've got that full online recovery program with the forum as well, why would you need a coach? So why are Femke and I needed? And what we found is that it is incredibly difficult to actually motivate and to keep yourself on track without any help. And this is where the Chrysalis Effect, I think, is really important, that it emphasizes connection and support and not trying to power through on your own. And I think that's something that nurses have a really strong tendency to feel that they have to do. So as a coach, what do? One of the things is I'm an informed outsider, so that I can actually, as we talk, I can notice the things that you're saying, see the bigger picture, and spot when you are talking about beliefs, when you're showing beliefs that might be getting in the way of your recovery, and things that might have been so much a part of your life that you've never even questioned them at all. So, for example, I'm just thinking of somebody I spoke to who was having problems because she had to get up at 5:30 every morning to let the dog out, to take it for a walk. And she was sleeping on a couch at the time. She'd split up from her husband and was living in a very, very small house with both her children. And she was exhausted. And so I have to get up to let the dog out at 5:30. So I challenged her on that and said, why is the dog making a mess? No, but the dog needs to go out. I said, well, what do you need? And she needed sleep. I said, well, whose needs come first, yours or the dog's? And it never occurred to her that actually she was lower on the priority list than the dog's. And it took somebody just querying that and identifying that prioritizing for her to be able to start thinking, well, actually, maybe I don't need to. Maybe the dog can manage a bit longer. So it's sort of quite a small one, but that kind of intervention. As a coach, I can support you through what is actually quite a difficult process. So recovery is not an easy fix, and it does require a lot of investment of time and energy that you don't feel that you have. And it's a hard thing to face the fact that you're vulnerable when you've been used to being the strong nurse, the strong doctor, whatever. So having somebody who's been through it and who recognizes that, who can give you the support you need to let you know that it's going to be okay and it is actually safe to admit that you have got weaknesses. I also help my clients with boundary settings, and that's a very difficult one as well. So learning how to say no, but even before then, recognizing that there needs to be a boundary, or that maybe you don't have boundaries at all. And so I work with people who might look at a specific situation, they don't know how to handle it, and we might practice, what might you say, what would happen, and do some role play there. And I offer accountability. So I said it is quite difficult to stay on track if you're relying entirely on discipline. So I would encourage my clients to make small, manageable goals, and then they will agree to let me know how they get on. So if, for example, you say, right, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes every day for the next week, you're much more likely to do it if you said, I will email you at the end of the week, Alison, to let you know when I've done it, than if you're just thinking, oh, that's what I'm aiming for. I offer a safe space and an open ear for your trauma. And as somebody who has been a nurse, who's been out there and seen some pretty dire things, that kind of reduces the need to go into huge amounts of detail, but also the worry about, well, what can I share with people? And I think there can be that sometimes. You don't want to unburden the things that you really struggle with on somebody else. And that brings me on to referrals. So there will be times, there are times with clients where what they need is beyond the skills that I have. And often that's in the area of trauma therapy. So Femke and I work as part of a team with trauma therapists. So when that comes up, when that's an issue, we can refer you on and give you guidance. But equally, we might refer you on to a nutritional therapist or a whole range of other therapies. I might refer somebody on to Femke if I think that her art and creative focus might be particularly helpful for them. And talking about creativity, it's really important as part of what I do as a coach to help people to develop a vision of what they want life to be. And when you are stuck at home on the couch, it's incredibly difficult, I think, sometimes to imagine that anything will be any different. But you need a sense of what do you want life to be to motivate you and keep you moving forward. And that's something that I work with my clients on. And I try to help people to see just how incredibly amazingly skilled and talented they are and the options that are open. And I remember doing my PhD being told so often, well, I'm a nurse, what else can I do? I can't leave. I just can't imagine working in any other job. And yet nursing is such a phenomenally wide and rich skill set, an enormous range of options. So my clients might want to go back into the nursing that they've been doing, and they might decide that's right for them, but they go back with a new set of skills to protect themselves and to be able to care for themselves. Or it may be that they'll look at their skill set and think, well, actually, I can get what I get from nursing in a different setting. And that's very much what I'm doing now. So I see I'm drawing on all my nursing background and my training, as well as my coaching and my experience of recovery to help people. So what do I offer? I offer one-to-one coaching alongside the programme, and I also offer a 30-minute free discovery call for people who just want to talk through whether it might be suitable for them. And I'm currently working on what I'm calling my Little Red Hen course, which is about taking control of your own recovery, specifically for nurses. And that draws on the story of the little red hen who said, I shall do it myself. And it's kind of recognising the limitations that poses when you're doing it entirely by yourself, and encouraging you to channel that inner nurse that's been there looking after other people for so long to nurse yourself. And I know Florence Nightingale used to talk about that the job of the nurse is to remove the barriers to healing so the body can heal itself. And so it's about you as the nurse, as the person who's the expert on yourself, having a team around you to support your recovery. One of the other things I'm looking at in the future possibly is doing some specialised group coaching for nurses alongside the Chrysalis Effect, and that would be a way of actually bringing down the costs it would be a lower fee for that than if you have the one-to-one. But also really an open ear. So I think for Femke and I, it would be really helpful to know from what you've heard about what we do, what might be helpful, what would be most helpful for you. At this point in the presentation, we opened the floor to comments and questions from those who attended. So having watched this video through, if you have any comments, please do pop them in the comment section below. And if you have questions, if you think that you might be interested in working with me, just have a look at my website. The link is below, and there is a booking link there, and I offer a 30-minute complimentary, no obligations session with me, so we can just talk through where you are and how I might be able to help you. Please do like and subscribe this video too. And if you're interested, there is also a link below to my newsletter so that you can keep in touch with what I'm doing. And I also share a little bit of my personal recovery and tips and ideas for helping to progress your own recovery. Thanks for watching.